Vert had seen many species prepare for war. He had watched the Calvari sharpen their blades in silence. He had observed the NTHK sing their death hymns before battle. He had documented the cold, mathematical preparations of the Sur as they calculated acceptable losses, but he had never seen anything like the humans. The shuttle docked with the human flagship and Vert stepped through the airlock with his recording device active. He was a diplomatic observer sent by the Galactic Council to document humanity's first major interstellar war. The Council wanted to know what kind of species they had allowed into their ranks. They wanted to understand if humans were a threat intended to find out. The ship was called the Relentless Dawn. It was not the largest vessel Vert had ever seen, but something about it felt different. The metal corridors hummed with energy. The air smelled strange, like sweat and coffee and something else he could not name. Later, he would learn that smell was called anticipation. A young officer met him at the airlock. She had dark hair pulled back tight and a smile that seemed genuine. "Welcome aboard," she said. "I'm Lieutenant Katie Nguyen. The captain is waiting for you." Vert followed her through the corridors. He expected to see fear. The humans were about to fight the Drath Collective, a species that had conquered over 40 star systems. Drath had never lost a war. Their bodies were covered in natural armor that could stop most weapons. Their minds were linked in a hive consciousness that allowed perfect coordination. Every species in the galaxy knew that fighting the Draft meant death, but the humans did not seem to know this. Vort passed crew members who nodded at him politely. He heard laughter from a room they passed. Two engineers argued about something called a baseball game while they repaired a conduit. A group of soldiers sat in a circle clinging their weapons and telling jokes. "Your crew does not seem concerned," Vert said carefully. Katie glanced at him. "About what? About the war? About the draft?" She was quiet for a moment, then she shrugged. "We're concerned. We're just not scared. There's a difference." Vort did not understand the difference. He made a note to investigate further. The captain's quarters were simple: a desk, a chair, a window that looked out at the stars. Captain Jake Morrison stood when Vert entered. He was older than most of the crew, with gray at his temples and lines around his eyes, but those eyes were sharp and calm. "Observer Vert," Morrison said, extending his hand. Vert had learned about this human greeting. He took the captain's hand and felt the strength in his grip. "Welcome to the Relentless Dawn. I hope your stay will be educational. I am here to document your species' approach to warfare." Vert said, "The Council wishes to understand humanity better." Morrison smiled. It was not a happy smile. "Then you've come at the right time. We're about to show the galaxy exactly who we are." Vert activated his recorder. "May I ask why your species has chosen to fight the Drath?" The Council offered to negotiate on your behalf. The Drath might have accepted payment for the colony they destroyed. War is not necessary. Room went cold. Katie's smile disappeared. Morrison's eyes hardened. "New Providence," Morrison said quietly. That was the name of the colony. 14,000 people, families, children. They weren't soldiers. They weren't a threat. The Draft destroyed them because they wanted our territory and we were in the way. "I understand, but surely no." Morrison's voice was firm but not angry. "You don't understand. Not yet, but you will." He walked to the window and looked out at The fleet assembled around them, dozens of ships all waiting. The council asked, "Why we won't negotiate? Here's your answer. Because some things can't be paid for, some debts can only be settled one way." Vorth recorded every word. "And what way is that?" Morrison turned back to face him. "We're going to make sure the Drath never do this again to anyone ever." That night, Vorth wandered the ship. He wanted to understand these strange creatures. He found himself in the mess hall where crew members ate and talked. He sat in a corner and watched. A young man noticed him and walked over. He had a friendly face and carried 2 cups of something hot. "You look lost," the man said. "I'm Danny Vasquez, chief engineer. Want some coffee?" Vert accepted the cup. The liquid was bitter and strange, but he drank it to be polite. "I am trying to understand your species." Danny laughed and sat down across from him. "Good luck with that. We don't even understand ourselves most of the time. You are going to war against a species that has never been defeated. Your technology is not superior. Your numbers are smaller. By every logical measure, you should lose, yet your crew laughs and jokes as if they are going on a vacation." Danny's smile faded a little, but it didn't disappear. "You want to know why we're not afraid?" "Yes." Danny leaned back in his chair. "Because fear doesn't help. We've learned that. Thousands of years of wars and disasters and terrible things. We've learned that being afraid doesn't stop bad things from happening. It just makes you freeze up when you should be moving." He took a sip of his coffee. "So we choose to keep moving. We joke because it reminds us we're alive. We laugh because tomorrow we might not be able to." Vert considered this. "But you know, you might die." "Sure, everyone dies eventually. The question is whether you die having done something that matters." Danny looked around the mess hall at his crew mates. Every person on the ship knows someone who was on New Providence. A friend, a cousin, a lover. We're not fighting because we want to. We're fighting because someone hurt our family, and humans don't let that go. Vert wrote his first report that night. He chose his words carefully. "I have arrived aboard the human flagship. Initial observation suggests a species that defies standard psychological models. They face certain death with humor and warmth. They speak of vengeance without hatred. They prepare for war as if preparing for a difficult job that simply needs to be done. I do not yet understand them, but I am beginning to suspect that the Council may have underestimated what humanity is capable of. More observations to follow." He looked out his small window at the stars. Somewhere out there the Drath were waiting. They had destroyed worlds. They had crushed entire civilizations. They had no idea what was coming for them. The fleet traveled through space for 3 weeks before reaching Drath territory. Vert used this time to study the humans. He read their history files. He interviewed crew members. He watched how they lived and worked and played. What he learned disturbed him deeply. He had assumed humans were like other species, creatures who had evolved to survive, who fought when necessary but preferred peace. He was wrong. Humans were something else entirely. They were a species built for endurance, built to suffer and keep going, built to face impossible odds and refuse to quit. Danny Vasquez told him about something called persistence hunting. Long ago, before humans had weapons or tools, they hunted animals by simply following them. They could not run as fast as their prey. They could not fight as well, but They could keep moving when other creatures had to stop, they would follow. An animal for hours, sometimes days, until it collapsed from exhaustion. Then they would kill it. We're not the fastest, Danny explained. We're not the strongest, but we don't stop. That's our gift. We just don't stop. Vert found this terrifying. He spoke with Marine Sergeant Amy Reyes, a small woman with hard eyes and gentle hands. She told him about her family history. Her great-grandmother had lived through something called the Dust Bowl, a time when the land itself turned against her. People, crops died, animals starved, the air filled with dirt and dust. She walked 400 miles, Amy said, with 2 children, no food, no water. People told her to give up, said it was impossible. She kept walking anyway, made it to California, raised those kids, lived to be 93. She smiled. That's human history. People telling us something is impossible and us doing it anyway. Verdef asked Lieutenant Commander Ben Kowalski about human military history. He expected to hear about victories, about great conquests. Instead, Ben told him about defeats. He told him about a place called Thermopylae where 300 soldiers stood against an army of hundreds of thousands. They knew they would die. They fought anyway, holding the enemy back long enough for their people to prepare. Every single one of them died. That was 3,000 years ago, Ben said. We still remember their names. We still tell their stories. That's what being human means. We remember the ones who stood when they could have run. He told him about a city called Stalingrad, where soldiers fought in frozen ruins for months, dying by the thousands, refusing to surrender. He told him about a beach called Normandy where young men ran into gunfire because the alternative was letting evil win. He told him about a hospital ship called the Comfort which sailed into war zones to save lives even when it was being shot at. We're not a peaceful species, Ben admitted. We've done terrible things to each other. Wars, genocides, cruelties you can't imagine, but we've also done incredible things. We've sacrificed ourselves for strangers. We've rebuilt cities after they were destroyed. We've looked at the worst parts of ourselves and said, never again. He paused. We don't always keep that promise, but we keep trying. Vorth began to understand something important. Humans did not fight to win. They fought because they believed some things were worth dying for. Victory was preferred but not required. What mattered was the fighting itself, the refusal to surrender, the choice to stand even when standing was hopeless. He interviewed medical officer Lav Kim one evening. She was a kind woman who spent her days preparing for the wounded she knew would come. Vordef asked her why humans kept fighting wars when they knew the cost. Lavra thought about it for a long time. There's a word in English, she said finally, spite. It means doing something just because someone told you that you couldn't, or because someone tried to take something from you. She smiled sadly. We're a spiteful species, I guess. We don't like being told what we can't do. We don't like bullies. When someone hurts us, we don't just want to survive. We want to make sure they can never hurt anyone else. That sounds like vengeance, Vert said. It's more than that. Vengeance is about the past. This is about the future. We fight so that the next generation doesn't have to. We die so that our children can live in peace. She looked at him with tired eyes. That's the human bargain. We suffer so others don't have to. Vorth spent hours Reviewing human literature and art, he found stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. He found songs about loss and hope and determination. He found paintings of soldiers carrying wounded friends through fire and ash. But what struck him most were the small things, the way crew members checked on each other, the way they shared food and stories and laughter, the way they said, "I've got your back," and meant it with their whole hearts. One night he saw something that changed his understanding forever. Young ensign named Chris Delgado was sitting alone in an observation room, looking at the stars. Vort approached him carefully. "May I join you?" he asked. Dr. Chris nodded. He was young, barely 20 years old by human counting. His eyes were wet. "My sister was on New Providence," Chris said quietly. "She was a teacher, taught little kids how to read." He wiped his eyes. "She used to send me videos. The kids would wave at the camera and say hello to Uncle Chris." Vert did not know what to say. "I am sorry. When I heard what happened, I wanted to die. I wanted to give up." Chris looked at him. "But then I thought about what she would say. She'd say, 'Don't you dare let them win.' So I joined the fleet. I trained. I prepared, and now I'm here. You fight for her memory. I fight for all of them. Every person on that colony, every kid who never got to grow up." Chris's voice was steady now. "The draft think they can scare us into submission. They don't understand. You can't scare people who have already lost everything. You can only make them angry." Vert updated his report that night. "I have studied human history and psychology extensively. My conclusion is troubling. Humans are not motivated by logic or self-interest like most species. They are motivated by bonds, connections to each other that transcend survival instincts. They will die for family. They will die for friends. They will die for strangers they have never met, simply because those strangers are also human. This makes them unpredictable. It makes them irrational. It makes them the most dangerous species I have ever encountered." The draft believe they are fighting a military force. They are wrong. They are fighting a family, and families do not forgive those who hurt their own. The fleet reached the edge of draft territory 3 days later. Vert stood on the observation deck and watched the stars ahead. Somewhere in that darkness an empire waited, an empire that had never known defeat, that was about to change. The draft transmission came at midnight. Ship time. Every screen on the relentless dawn flickered, and then a face appeared. It was not really a face, more like a collection of armored plates arranged around glowing eyes. The draft did not have mouths. They communicated through vibrations in their throat. "Plates, human vessels," the voice said. It was translated by computer, but the contempt was clear. "You have entered draft territory. You have 2 choices. Surrender your fleet and submit to our rule, or be destroyed. We have crushed 47 species. You will not be different. Choose now." Vort watched Captain Morrison from across the bridge. The captain sat in his chair, hands folded, face calm. Around him his crew waited. Nobody spoke. Morrison leaned forward and activated the communication channel. His voice was quiet but clear. "Come and take the channel." Closed. The draft face disappeared. For a moment there was silence on the bridge. Then Katie knew. Yin laughed. "Well, Captain, I guess we're doing this." Morrison smiled. "Sound general quarters. All hands to battle stations." The ship came alive. Alarms blared. Crew members ran to their positions. Vought was escorted to a reinforced observation room where he could watch the battle safely. He activated his recorder with shaking hands. Through the viewing port, he saw the Drath fleet emerge from behind a nearby moon. He counted them. 173 ships. The human fleet had 62. Logic said this battle was already over. Logic said the humans should flee. Logic said there was no hope. The humans attacked anyway. Vought had studied many battles. He had seen the precise formations of the Cirques. He had watched the swarming tactics of the Nathok Kai. He had observed the defensive walls of the Kelvari, but he had never seen anything like human combat. It was chaos, beautiful, terrible chaos. Human pilots flew their small fighters directly at the Drath carriers, dodging weapons fire that should have killed them a dozen times. They aimed for weak points, engines, sensor arrays, weapon systems. When their ships were damaged, they kept flying. When their weapons ran dry, they rammed. Vought watched a fighter pilot steer his burning ship into a draft destroyer's bridge. The pilot was singing. Vought could hear him on the communication channel, singing an old Earth song about not being afraid of the dark. He was still singing when his ship exploded on the relentless dawn. Damage reports flooded in. A weapons array was destroyed. Whole breaches on decks 7 and 12. Fires and engineering. The crew responded like a single organism. Damage control teams rushed to the breaches. Engineers rerouted power around damaged systems. Medical staff prepared for casualties. Nobody panicked. Nobody froze. Vought saw Danny Vasquez on a monitor working in a compartment that was filling with smoke. His team was trying to repair a critical power conduit. The temperature was rising. The air was running out. Sir, we need to evacuate, someone said. Danny shook his head. If we lose this conduit, we lose main weapons. Keep working. They stayed. They fixed the conduit. 3 of them died from smoke inhalation. The others carried their bodies out and went back to work. Draft boarding party breached the lower decks. Vought watched the internal cameras. The Sergeant Amy Reyes led her Marines to meet them. The Drath were massive, 8 ft tall, colored in natural armor that could stop most weapons. They had claws that could tear through metal. Their eyes glowed with hive mind connection, moving in perfect coordination. The human should have been slaughtered. Instead, Amy Reyes smiled. Remember New Providence, she said to her team, and then she charged. The battle in those corridors was brutal. Humans died, but so did Drath. The Marines used explosives, blades, even their bare hands. They fought in ways that made no tactical sense, sacrificing themselves to take down single enemies, holding positions long after they should have retreated. One Marine, badly wounded, wrapped his arms around a Drath warrior and detonated a grenade on his belt. He took the alien with him. The boarding party was destroyed. 12 humans died, all 17 Drath were killed. Outside the ship, the battle continued, the destroyer burning. Ember took heavy damage early in the fight. Its engines were destroyed. Its weapons were failing by every measure. It was finished. Its captain, a woman named Rose Martinez, made a choice. She ordered non-essential crew to the escape pods. Then she turned her dying ship toward the Drath command vessel. The burning Ember had no weapons left. It had no engines. All it had was momentum. En masse. Rose Martinez sent a final message to the fleet. Tell my kids I love them. Give the draft my regards. The burning amber struck the draft. Command vessel at full speed, both ships disappeared in a ball of fire. Vert watched from his observation room, his recorder capturing everything. He had seen species fight before. He had seen courage and sacrifice, but this was different. This was something beyond what he had words for. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it finally ended, the draft had retreated. They had lost 41 ships. The humans had lost 23. By any military standard, it was a draw. Neither side had won. Neither side had lost, but Verth knew better. He had seen the draft flee. He had seen their perfect coordination falter. He had seen their formations break. He had seen them afraid. That night the surviving crew gathered in the mess hall. They did not celebrate. They sat in small groups, holding each other, crying, remembering. Names were spoken softly. Chris Delgado, Rose Martinez. The crew of the burning ember. Captain Morrison stood and read from a list every name of every person who had died. It took almost an hour. When he finished, the room was silent. Then Katie Noon began to stomp her foot. Once, twice, others joined her soon. The entire room was stomping in unison, a rhythm that shook the deck plates. Vert asked Danny Vasquez what it meant. It's how we say goodbye, Danny said. His face was streaked with tears, but he was stomping too. We're telling them. We heard them. We're telling them we'll remember, and we're telling the draft that for every one of us they killed today, 10 more are coming tomorrow. Vorth returned to his quarters and wrote his report. His hands were still shaking. I have witnessed my first human battle. I have made a critical error in my initial assessment. I believed humans were predators, dangerous but predictable. I was wrong. Humans are not predators. They are something far more dangerous. They are a species that has decided death is an acceptable price for victory. They do not fight to survive. They fight to win, even if winning means they do not survive. The Drath have conquered 47 species because those species wanted to live. Humans want something more than life. They want meaning, and they will burn the galaxy to ash to find it. He looked out his window at the stars. Somewhere out there the Drath were regrouping. They still had more ships, more soldiers, more resources, but they had never faced anything like this. And Verth was beginning to understand that numbers might not matter, not against humans. The war lasted 3 months. Vert documented every day of it. He watched the human fleet push deeper into draft territory, fighting battle after battle. They won some, they lost others, but they never retreated. They never stopped. They moved forward like a tide that refused to go back out. The Drath did not understand. Their hive mind could not process what was happening. They had destroyed 23 human ships in the first battle. They had killed thousands of humans. By their calculations, the humans should have surrendered. The cost was too high. The odds were too bad. No rational species would continue, but humans were not rational. Vert was beginning to understand that this was their greatest strength. He watched them adapt. After each battle, the survivors gathered to analyze what had happened. They studied draft tactics, looking for patterns and weaknesses. They shared information across the fleet instantly. What one ship learned, all ships knew. Within hours, a young lieutenant named Sam Porter discovered that Drath armor was weakest at the joints within a day. Every human weapon was recalibrated to target those points. Chief Engineer Danny Vasquez figured out how to disrupt Drath communication frequencies within a week. Human ships could isolate individual Drath vessels from their hive mind, turning their greatest advantage into a weakness. Medical Officer Lavra Kim developed a treatment for the poison that Drath claws delivered. The survival rate for wounded soldiers doubled. The Draft adapted too, but they were slower. Their hive mind required consensus. Decisions had to flow up to the central intelligence and back down again. It was efficient for coordination but terrible for innovation. Humans had no such limitation. Every soldier, every pilot, every engineer was capable of independent thought. They made decisions on the fly. They improvised. They invented new tactics in the middle of battles. Ver interviewed Captain Morrison one evening after a particularly brutal fight. The captain looked tired. He had lost more friends that day. How do you keep going? Ver asked. The losses are significant. Your crew is exhausted. Why not pull back and regroup? Morrison smiled sadly. Because if we stop, we give them time to recover. And if they recover, they'll come for more of our colonies, more children, more families. He shook his head. We rest when this is over, not before. Vorth noticed something strange. As the weeks passed, the humans were not becoming harder or colder. They were becoming closer. The losses that should have broken them were somehow making them stronger. They told stories about their dead, not sad stories, funny ones. They remembered jokes their friends had told, embarrassing moments, small kindnesses. They kept their fallen comrades alive through memory. They named things after the dead. A repaired weapon system was called Martinez's gift after the captain of the burning Ember. A new attack formation was named the Delgado Run after young Chris, who had died 3 weeks into the campaign, leading a rescue mission. When Chris died, Vert expected his friends to fall apart. Instead, they gathered in his quarters and packed his belongings carefully. They wrote letters to his family. They told each other about the time he had accidentally set his hair on fire during training and how he had laughed about it for weeks. He would have wanted us to laugh, Katie Newen said, wiping her eyes. He always said the only way to beat the darkness was to be louder than it. The humans sang songs. This confused Vert at first. Why would a species at war waste energy on music? But he came to understand that the songs were not waste. They were fuel. They sang old songs from Earth, songs about battles and heroes and refusing to surrender. They sang new songs written on the ship, songs about New Providence and the Drath and what it meant to be human among the stars. One night, Verth heard the entire crew singing together in the mess hall. The song was simple with words that repeated over and over. We are still here. We are still here. We are still here. It was not a battle cry. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of existence, a message to the universe that no matter what happened, humans would endure. The Drath began to change as the war continued. Vert intercepted their communications when he could. What he heard surprised him. They were confused. Their hive mind could not understand why the humans kept fighting. They had calculated that human morale should have collapsed after the first month. They had predicted surrender after the second, now in the third month with Thousands of human casualties, the fleet was still advancing. Worse, the Drath were experiencing something new. Individual members of the Hive were asking questions. Why were they fighting? What was the purpose? Was victory worth the cost? These were not Drath questions. The Hive mind did not question, it acted, but contact with humans was infecting them with doubt. Vert documented this carefully. The humans were not just winning battles. They were winning minds. Their stubborn refusal to submit was breaking something fundamental in the Draft, consciousness. Near the end of the third month, the fleet held a memorial service for all who had fallen. Vorth was invited to attend. He stood in the cargo bay with hundreds of humans. The names were read, thousands of them now. Each name was followed by a moment of silence. Each silence was followed by a single word spoken by the crowd together. Remembered when the names were done. Captain Morrison spoke. We did not ask for this war. We did not want it, but when they came for our people, we had only one choice: to stand, to fight, to show the universe that humanity does not kneel. He looked around the room. Some of you will not see the end of this. I may not see the end of this, but our children will. Our grandchildren will. They will live in a galaxy where the Drath know the cost of attacking humanity. That is what we fight for, not vengeance, not glory, the future. The room erupted in cheering. Humans hugged each other, cried, laughed. They were exhausted and grieving and determined. All at once, Verth understood something then that he had been struggling to grasp. Humans did not fight despite their losses. They fought because of them. Every death gave meaning to the deaths before. Every sacrifice demanded that the survivors continue. They were bound together by grief and love and stubborn hope. He sent his report to the Galactic Council that night. The war enters its final phase. The Giraffe have superior numbers but deteriorating morale. The humans have heavy losses but unbreakable spirit. I have observed something remarkable. The more they humans lose, the harder they fight. This defies every psychological model we have developed for predicting species behavior in conflict. I believe the humans will win this war, not because they are stronger, not because they are smarter, but because they have decided to win, and they will not change that decision regardless of cost. I am beginning to understand why the universe might one day dread the species. They do not know how to quit, and against an enemy like that, even the mightiest empire can fall. The fleet moved toward the Drath home world. The final battle was coming. Vert did not know if he would survive to see it, but for the first time in his long career he found himself hoping one side would win. He was rooting for the humans. The Drath home world hung in space like a dark jewel. It was massive, 3 times the size of Earth, covered in gray cities and factories that had produced war machines for 10,000 years. No enemy had ever reached it. No hostile ship had ever entered its orbit. Until now. For Teth stood on the bridge of the relentless dawn and watched the human fleet assemble for the final battle. What he saw made him believe in miracles. There were over 200 ships. Now, not all of them were warships. He saw merchant freighters with weapons welded to their hulls, mining vessels converted into missile platforms, transport ships filled with volunteers, civilian craft that had no business being in a war zone. They had come anyway. Who are these people? Vort asked Katie Noon. she smiled. Civilians. Families of the people who died at New Providence, factory workers who wanted to help, farmers who learned to fly. When word got out that we were making our final push, they came from every human colony, thousands of them. They knew they would probably die. They came. Anyway, Vert stared at the fleet. Old ships and new ones, military vessels and civilian crafts, a ragged armada held together by nothing but determination and love. They have no training, he said. They have no military experience. No, Katie agreed, but they have something else. They have a reason to fight, and sometimes that's enough. Captain Morrison called the fleet to attention. His voice was broadcast to every ship, every crew member, every volunteer. This is it, he said simply. The moment we've been fighting for. The Drath are out there waiting. They have more ships than us. They have better weapons. They have their home world to defend. He paused. But we have something they don't. We have each other. We have the memory of everyone we've lost. And we have a promise to keep. He took a breath. I won't lie to you. Not everyone is coming home. Some of us will die today, maybe most of us, but what we do here matters. If we win, the Drath will never threaten another human colony. If we lose, we will have shown the galaxy what humanity is made of. Either way, our children will tell stories about this day. Let's give them something worth telling. The fleet roared in response, every ship, every channel filled with cheering. The sound of it made Verth's scales tingle. The Drath fleet emerged from behind their moon. Over 300 ships, their largest force ever, assembled. Their hive mind sent one final message: you cannot win. Surrender, and your deaths will be quick. Morrison's response was simple: no. The battle began. Vert had thought he understood human warfare after 3 months of observation. He was wrong. What happened above the Drath home world was beyond anything he had seen before. Human ships broke formation immediately. Not from chaos, but from strategy. Small groups targeted specific enemies. Civilian vessels drew fire so military ships could strike. Damaged crafts continued fighting until they literally could not move. A transport ship filled with volunteers flew directly into the Drath defensive line. Its captain, a grandmother named Clara Santos, had lost 3 grandchildren on New Providence. Her ship was destroyed, but it took 4 draft fighters with it. Her last words were for the little ones. Fighter pilots flew suicide missions without being ordered to. They saw opportunities and took them, knowing they would not survive. A young woman named Lisa Park disabled 2 draft destroyers by flying through their bridge sections. She was 22 years old, on the ground, or what passed for ground in space combat. Boarding parties fought through draft ships with impossible courage. Sergeant Amy Reyes led her Marines through 3 enemy vessels before finally falling. Her last act was throwing a grenade into a Drath command center. She was still smiling when she died. The battle lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of fire and death and sacrifice. Ver recorded everything, even when his hands shook so badly he could barely hold his device. Captain Morrison was wounded early in the fight. Shrapnel from a near miss cut through the bridge, killing 2 officers and hitting him in the chest. He refused to leave his post. He commanded the fleet for 11 more hours with a piece of metal in his lung. The end, when victory was finally sight. The Draft did something unprecedented. They surrendered. That not a partial Surrender, not a negotiated peace. Complete unconditional surrender, there. Hive mind fractured by doubt and devastated by losses, simply stopped. Fighting, the Drath Queen sent a transmission to the human fleet. We yield, we cannot defeat you. We do not understand you, but we recognize that continuing this war will mean the end of our species. We yield, the fighting stopped, human ships held their fire. For a long moment there was only silence, then Captain Morrison spoke. His voice was weak, but his words were clear. We accept your surrender. The war is over. Vorth expected celebration. He expected cheering and singing and joy. Instead, the bridge fell silent. Katie Nguyen bowed her head. The crew members around her did the same. Someone began to weep, then another, then another. Morrison slumped in his chair, finally allowing the medics to treat him. His eyes were wet. We won, Vert said. Why do you grieve? Morrison looked at him with tired, sad eyes. Because we won, Vert. That means we killed enough of them that they stopped fighting. We burned their ships. We ended their lives, thousands of them, maybe millions. He closed his eyes. That's not something to celebrate. That's something to remember, something to mourn, something to make sure never happens again. Vert finally understood. Humans did not love war. They were simply willing to wage it when necessary, and when it was over they carried the weight of what they had done. They did not forget. They did not move on easily. They remembered every death, enemy and friend alike, and they let that memory shape them. That night Vert wrote his final report. I was sent to observe whether humanity posed a threat to galactic stability. I have my answer. Humans are the most dangerous species I have ever encountered, not because of their weapons, their ships, or their numbers. They are dangerous because they understand the cost of war and choose to pay it anyway. They are dangerous because they remember every name of every soldier who fell, and they carry those names into the next battle. They are dangerous because their resolve is not born from hope of victory, but from refusal to accept defeat. The Draft had numbers, they had technology, they had biological superiority. Humans had something else. They had each other, and that was enough. I recommend the Council never give humanity a reason to march to war against us, because I have seen them march. I have seen them fight. I have seen them mourn their dead and bury their friends and then stand up and keep going. I have seen them win a war that should have been impossible, and I finally understand why the universe dreads them. They are a species that cannot be broken. They are a species that will not surrender. They are a species that fights not for survival but for meaning, and against that kind of enemy there is no defense, snorts the Drath. Learned this truth too late. I pray the rest of the galaxy learns it before it is too late for us as well. End report. Vorth looked out the window. One last time. The battle was over. The dead were being counted. The survivors were holding each other, crying and laughing and simply being alive. They were humans. Strange, impossible, terrifying humans. And for the first time in his life, Vorth was grateful to have them as Illies, because if they ever became enemies, the galaxy would burn.